Hello, and welcome to the session on continuous integration, or CI, using Spira, Rapise, and Jenkins. My name's Adam Sandman from Inflectra, and I'll be presenting today. So in this session, we're going to talk about setting up a basic CI pipeline in Jenkins, how you can connect it to Spira, which could be Spira Test, or Spira Team, or Spira Plan, and then we're going to add some simple unit tests, API tests, and then finally, some Rapise user interface tests. And I'm going to show you how you can configure Jenkins, how you can configure NUnit, and also use the special schedule on build feature in Spira to automatically do the scheduling of the UI tests once the main pipeline is done. So first of all, let's look at a typical pipeline, what's in it. And this is, again, a simplified pipeline. I mean, you can have DevOps pipelines that are highly complicated with lots of containerization and things being spun up on demand. But we're going to take a very simple example of a C# project that's going to be compiled using Microsoft Build or MS Build. We're then going to run some standard unit tests written in NUnit, and those will report back into Spira Team using our NUnit plugin that we have for NUnit. The whole build as a whole will automatically report back when those two portions are done into Spira Team using our Jenkins plugin. Once that part of the plugin is done, we will then have Jenkins schedule the test set automatically for the user interface testing, and that will be launched from Rapise using Rapise Launcher. So that way we've got Jenkins effectively orchestrating the compilation, the building of the code, the deployment of the code to the website, and the running of the unit tests. Jenkins then hands over the scheduling to Rapise and Rapise Launcher for running the UI portion. Now you can set up in other ways. You could have the unit tests also be kicked off by Spira using remote launch. You could have the Rapise tests be fully embedded in the pipeline and be part of the Jenkins job. So this is not the only way of doing things, but I wanted to give you a highlight and an overview of how you can use the schedule on build feature, which is useful for seeing that way. So if you're going to do this at home, what will you need? Well, you'll need a copy of Spira Test, Spira Team, or Spira Plan. You'll need a CI tool. I'm using Jenkins. We also do support Bamboo and TeamCity and Microsoft Azure DevOps pipelines. So you have other options as well. We also will need a unit testing tool. We're using NUnit because we are doing a .NET project, but you could also use JUnit, Python Unit, Ruby Unit, any number of different unit testing frameworks. And for the UI portion, you'll need Rapise as well and Rapise Launcher. So the first thing we have to do is we have to connect Jenkins to Spira. So how do we do that? Well, if you look at Jenkins, and this is a sample Jenkins server with a bunch of different jobs, first of all, you have to set the global configuration at the top. That's where you'll tell your Jenkins system what the URL is to find Spira, the login and password for connecting to Spira. And if you're using OAuth or other providers, you'll have to use the API key instead for single sign-on. Once you set that up, you can test the connection, and if that works, you can then go into the job-specific configuration. That's the configuration specific to your pipeline or job within Jenkins, and you will associate that job with a specific Spira project and release version number. And you can use the button to verify the release, make sure it exists, it's right. Once that happens, you will see the build appear in Spira as a release under the Releases tab. So you have a release, and then under that there's a list of builds, and it'll tell you if it passes or fails. And if you click on it, you can get the details of that specific build. Oh, and you'll notice before I move on, you can also see the revisions that were included in that build, the code changes. You'll be able to see any defects that were logged. Anything like that that comes back from Jenkins will be displayed natively inside Spira. Once that happens, we've now got an application which has hopefully been compiled and deployed and should be ready for testing. And then you can typically add automated unit tests to your pipeline. And what we'll do is create a Spira test case for each of our unit tests. And then we'll use whatever test library we're using. For example, in this case, it's NUnit and C#. But as I mentioned, it could be JUnit and Java, Python unit and Python, or any other number of languages. And we have extensions that run on those different languages as part of the unit test framework. It's an extension that runs, in this case, it's a listener that sits there waiting for NUnit to run, and it sends the results back into Spira. And so what you'll do is include the credentials and the information inside of your test suite. This is how you would do it for NUnit 3. NUnit 2 is slightly different, which is what I'll be showing you. And it basically maps your automated unit test to a test case in Spira. When the test runs, depending if that unit test is designed to pass or fail, you will get a result back into Spira showing you what happened. And at that point, your test, assuming it's passed, like obviously in this case there are some failures, but we're assuming that all those unit tests pass, at that point your application has been tested at the unit level. You can also include API tests, also using the same unit test framework, or a different tool like SOAP-UI. At that point, you will have also tested the API endpoints of your application. Now it's time to move on to the UI testing, the top of the testing pyramid. And so to do that, we'll be adding a Rapise UI test. It's something that looks a bit like this. It's a slightly different one. And that unit test in this UI test in this case is written in Rapise and will run against different browsers. This example is using our Rapise codeless language called the RVL, or Rapise Visual Language. You will save your test case to Spira. Once it's in Spira, you can add it to a test set. The test set is the collection of tests that you'll be running. And then once that's done, you've then got a successful build that you can schedule using the schedule on build feature. And when the build runs, hopefully it passes, and you'll then get a result from the Rapise test, in addition to your unit tests and any manual tests you've done. So that's, in a nutshell, how you would configure a Jenkins job, add unit tests to the compiling code that runs, add API tests as well, and then you would hook up the Rapise UI testing aspects. If you also want to learn more about Rapise and automated testing for UI applications, please check out some of the other playlists and other videos during this conference. We have many playlists that are going to be focused on Rapise and test automation. I can only touch on it a little bit in this session. Okay, well that's enough PowerPoint. So let's move on to the live application. So what we have going on is Jenkins. This is our Jenkins server. And for today, we'll be actually testing our Inflectra company website. So hopefully you've all used that website before. This is going to be an example of actually running some tests against that. So first of all, this is our website project. We've already configured this Jenkins instance to point to the right server of Spira. This is our internal Spira server that we're using. This is our website project. It's one of the projects in our navigation tree. And inside of it, we have some unit tests. And we haven't yet run them on this release before. It's the first time. So they're all marked as gray. And you see all the test cases are here. Each of the test cases lives here. And we'll show you the code, how it maps. In addition to these unit tests, we've also got some API tests that haven't been run. And then we have our automated UI tests written in Rapise. Now, I did run this before the demo, so it's already marked as passed, but we'll see it again. It ran once. If you click on it, you'll see there is actually one test run from my earlier demo trying this out. So we'll see another one. So we should hopefully see more than one, then we know it worked. Okay, so that's the setup in Spira. In Jenkins, what do? Well, we create a job. In this case, it's going to be called website trunk. We configure it. And basically, in this case, we are pulling from our source code management tool. With this, we're actually using Subversion for our website. For Spira, we're using Git. Whichever one you use, whatever source code tool you use, you're going to have the Jenkins job either be triggered by the source code repository, or it's going to be polling for changes. We set this one for polling. So it's going to check for new code. There you go. There are your triggers. Once it runs, we've now enabled the Spira integration. We've put in the ID of our project, project ID 7. If you're not sure what the ID is, you can go to the URL. It's right here. It's the first number after the URL, the base URL before the word test case. And then the release version number. What's our version number? Well, that's okay. You can go into releases. And you'll see here, 2020 is the name of the release. But the important thing is the version number right here. And if you do verify release, Hopefully it will pass. And while that's connecting, we're going to go down here and look at some other stuff. So we're going to be compiling our website project. It's in Visual Studio. We've got to build a database using some Ant and Ant jobs in SQL Server. We're then going to kick off our end unit tests. So these are our end unit tests, and they use the end unit console runner. And we've got the listener pre-configured so it knows how to report back to Spira. If that works, it will also record back some unit tests and API tests. So that's our entire automated unit and API test suite. So it's pretty straightforward. It's, again, not a particularly sophisticated pipeline. Yep, successfully verified project and release. Good. It's basically it's compiling the code here. It's building the database here. It runs the unit tests, and it's done. So pretty straightforward. We haven't made any changes, so I'm not going to need to actually save anything. So I'm just going to go leave page. Okay, so we'll go back here. We're going to hit this button to kick off our job. We'll pretend it was polled automatically, but we'll simulate that. It does take about 5 minutes to run our website build, so we'll have a break in the video. We don't want to have you wait that long. Okay, so that's the configuration in Jenkins. Inside of Spira, we've got the releases, the test cases. We've set those all up ahead of time. The other thing we have to do is we have to type our unit tests. Okay, so how do we do that? So the unit test code is all here. We basically track the release ID and some code, but the important thing is here's all of our unit tests. So if I was to pick one of the unit tests, like the user test, this checks you can log into our website and all that stuff. We've got a setup task, a teardown, and the important thing is right here. These test cases are mapped to a Spira test case using this attribute. Every single unit test framework is a little bit different. This is NUnit 2.5. In NUnit 2.5, we use this syntax where we use the attributes of the test case methods. In NUnit 3, we switched to a JSON file. Every single one of our unit test frameworks is a little bit different because each of the tools works a little bit differently. So you'll need to look at the documentation. And if you're not sure where to find that, it's very easy. Just go to spiradoc.inflectra.com, go to integrations, go to testing, where automated testing, and pick the framework and Unit 3 and Unit 2. And each one will describe, here's the code that you're going to start with, here's a sample unit test framework, and then here's how you map it. That's the NUnit 3 syntax, where you use a JSON file. Here's the syntax in NUnit 2, where we use the attribute flavor. So everything is well documented. So just make sure you follow the appropriate documentation for the right tool and the right version of the tool. And that code will basically run inside Jenkins. So that's basically the code in Jenkins. And the key is to link your test case to a test case in Spira. And if you look at this, I'll take this test case 1295. And if I go to my website project, which is over here, I can do a search. If I go into test cases, and I'll put it in the ID number right there, go to the root, and there's my test case right here. Register new user, there's all the previous runs. Go to the code over here, that's the same one. Okay, so that's the linkage done by the ID. Okay, so that's how you set up the unit test code to map to Spira. The last piece is how do we set up the automated UI test case? Okay, good question. So here's Rapise over here. And ahead of time, what I did is I went into settings and it's linked up to Spira. It's connected. And I created this new test case. I went into our website and I logged in and I basically attempted to verify that I could log into the website. So I'm not going to record it right now, but I'm going to play it back to prove it works. So let's go over here with a new tab, go to Rapise, and I'm just going to play it locally. Hopefully it will work. So it's going to our website. Okay, so I've now started the playback and it's going to our website. And it's going to log in. And there we go, it played it back. So it went to our website, logged in, and played it back. It went pretty fast. It also verifies that the login name is correct as well. So you can see here there's verify steps. So that's what we want it to do. It's going to log into the website after the build runs, and hopefully it will pass if all goes to plan. So let's go ahead and put all the pieces together. We've already saved this back into Spira, so that's already saved. And if you go into Spira, you'll see that if I go to the test sets, we've got a new test set that I created called simple login tests. If we go into it, we'll see that in there we actually have the test set with the one test case I already created before. Now, just so we can see what's going on, we can also clone this and create a new test set. We'll call it simple login test copy. It's exactly the same. It's going to have the same test case in it. We'll hit save. And this time it has been set to actually not be run yet because it hasn't been run. So we'll get this one ready for running. We'll go back here, hit save. What we'll do is that we now want to use the special feature that I mentioned called schedule on build. It's right here. Normally with Spira, you will schedule the test set by choosing a date and time. I don't want to do that. I'm going to do schedule on build and hit save. And that means it won't just run it one time whenever it's scheduled to. It will run whenever the build kicks off. So let's go ahead and get rid of that here. Hit save. Okay. Perfect. So we have the build, the plan date. If you're going to use the scheduling in Spira, use the plan date. If you're going to have it be triggered by Jenkins, you need to make sure the release matches the release that the build is reporting against, version 2020, and that the schedule on build is set to yes, and it is set to yes. So we're all ready to go. So we've set up our pipeline. We've set up our automated post-pipeline test to run. Go back to test sets. You can see right here, it's not run. This is the one we're going to expect to run automatically. Whereas this login one we did earlier on is marked as completed, so it won't run. That's very important. Okay, so now we need to kick off the build and see what happens. Oh, and I should say, just to see what goes on, if you go into the Releases tab, you can also click on that 2020 and you'll see the build. If you go down to the bottom to where it says builds, you'll see the last build was then September 7th. So we're going to fire off the build today, September 8th, and that's what we'll know as the build is run and the tests are passed. So that's all the pipeline setup. That's everything we need to do. The last thing we do now is just kick it off. So let's go ahead over here, back to our build server, and I'm going to kick off the website build. So I hit the button. In real life, it will be running from a polling or a webhook, but we're just going to tell it to run. Go over here, make sure it's actually running. Okay, and now it's running. So the build takes about 5 minutes. So we're going to let it do its thing, and we'll come back in about 10 seconds, but in reality, we're going to have a 5-minute break. Welcome back. So while we were offline, here's what I prepared earlier, a past build. You can see in here, the website trunk just finished. It took about 5 minutes and 12 seconds. And so that's the building of the website and the running of the unit tests. It will now trigger the Rapise test to run. So while we wait for that part to happen, let's just go inside to Spira and see that the build is reported back. So we go to refresh. We'll now see there is a new build entry from September 8th. That's today. If we click on it, you can see right here, there's the build log that comes in from Jenkins. Revisions, you can see here what we did. We've added some stuff to the website, updated the version number. That was what I used to force it to actually compile. I changed the version number just to force it to rebuild. So the build is passed. And if we go then into the test case section, the unit tests that were previously showing gray for not run for the build, for the release, are now showing green. So we'll go in there, they're all run. The ones that you see marked as not run are ones that are actually NA that we're not using anymore. And if we go into the API test, same thing. So let's go look at that one test case that was in the user registration fixture. Register new user. You can see that test is passed. There's the run. If you want to see exactly what happened, click on the run. There's the passing. And it's a pass case, so by default, the unit test framework won't report much back. It's just going to say nothing reported because it's a pass. Now, nothing actually failed this time around, so there's no failures to look at. But if we want to see what a failure might have looked like, we can have a look at all test runs in the project, and we'll just look for failures. Again, nothing failed today, but just to show you what a failure might look like, we'll do automated, and we'll do status failed, because things do fail, hopefully, or have hopefully failed in the past. There we go. Here's an example of one that failed previously. When it failed? Oh, in March. And so here you can see an example of something failed because the test expected a value 4, it got a value 5, gives you the line of code where it failed, and that's what a typical failure at a unit test level would look like. So that's the compiling of the code and the running of the tests, and those will get reported back if you go to the release. You'll see here there's all the passes for that particular release. There are some failures. You'll notice those failures will be from manual test cases or other non-automated. So now let's look at the automated test set. The next thing, this is the one here. So what happened is it's marked as scheduled on build, and what that means is it automatically will put in the plan date. If you remember, last time we looked, there was no plan date, it was blank. Because the Jenkins job finished and passed against this release, it has automatically scheduled this to be run at the time when the build finished. Now, the way what works then is that it's up to Rapise launcher, which is polling Spira tests constantly, to now pick up the test case. And that will happen after the build is run. So that will depend on the polling interval in Rapise launcher. And once that runs, we'll see the test case appear back here in the test result. So we need to wait for that to happen. So let's go ahead and check on that, and then we'll come back. Okay, welcome back. The test set has just started executing inside of Rapise. You can see it's now marked as in progress. And once it's finished, the status will change from in progress to completed. Oh, it's done already. There, it's now completed. And if you look back here, we can now go to the test run, hit refresh, and there's a test run. Let's go look at the test run. Okay, and we told it to capture screenshots, so you can see exactly what it's doing right here. It runs through the test cases step by step, gives you the screenshot, and in this case, there were no failures, so there's nothing to include. If there were failures, we'd probably get more screenshots and more information, but it's a very simple test. It just logs in and verifies it can log in, which it did do. Verified that the login the screen, Ian Inflectra, and the name appeared correctly, and it did. And that passes, and there's an example right here of exactly what it did. Great. And that test will then be linked back to a requirement in Spira and to the release. And if you go back now into the test cases section for release 2020, go to the root, you'll see that the unit test have all passed, the API test have all passed, and now the automated UI test have all passed. So we're done. And in conclusion, that is how you set up a integrated pipeline in Jenkins using CI. You can tie it to your end unit tests or whatever unit test framework you're using. You can then, when it finishes, have it automatically schedule the UI tests, and it only runs those when the other tests have passed, so it avoids wasting time. And then you've now got a single test repository where you can now go into the dashboard and see all of your test information for the entire project all in one place. So tying your CI pipeline into your test management tool. If you have any questions on this, please write them in the chat window. Thanks so much.